The galaxy was under the firm, unforgiving control of the Zelthar Dominion, a race of aliens who had swept across star systems like a tidal wave, consuming everything in their path. The Zelthar were powerful, their technology far beyond anything most other species could even imagine. Their ships could outmaneuver anything in the sky, their weapons disintegrated entire fleets with a single shot, and their vast empire stretched across countless star systems. They had conquered and absorbed hundreds of civilizations, leaving nothing but fear and submission in their wake. Resistance to the Dominion was unheard of. Any rebellion was swiftly crushed, any force that opposed them vanquished before it could even fully assemble. The Zelthar didn't just rule the galaxy, they were the galaxy, or so they thought. For centuries they remained unchallenged, their supremacy undisputed. But as the Zelthar prepared for their next great campaign to extend their reach further into the unknown sectors, something unexpected began to unfold. It started with reports, strange, almost unbelievable reports, that began to trickle in from the farthest edges of the Dominion's territory. Mysterious ships, unlike anything the Zelthar had ever seen, were appearing in regions that had long been considered beyond their control. The ships weren't Zelthar designs. They didn't belong to any species the Dominion had ever encountered. At first, the High Council of the Dominion dismissed these as mere anomalies, minor glitches in their sensor systems or perhaps the work of rogue ships, lost and far from any known routes. After all, humanity, the species that had been discovered only a few centuries ago, known for its primitive technology and inability to conquer even their own planet, could never pose a threat to the mighty Zelthar. The Dominion considered humans a nuisance, a small, insignificant race. However, that dismissive attitude quickly began to crack when the first real skirmish occurred. A fleet of these strange human-made ships, seemingly out of nowhere, ambushed a small Zelthar convoy near the edge of their territory. At first, the Zelthar saw only the ship's unusual appearance, a sleek, angular design that didn't match anything they had catalogued. But what was more unsettling than their odd appearance was how these ships fought. The humans didn't engage in traditional combat like the Zelthar expected. Instead, they used a series of unpredictable tactics, employing guerrilla-like maneuvers, that left the larger and more powerful Zelthar vessels vulnerable. The Zelthar were used to overwhelming their enemies with force, but this new enemy fought in a way that felt different. They weren't just fighting to destroy. They were fighting with a cunning that unnerved the Dominion. The first battle was brief, but its impact was profound. The mysterious human ships didn't just escape, they inflicted significant damage, taking down several of the Dominion's fleet. And then they vanished, as mysteriously as they had arrived. The reports spread like wildfire through the Dominion. The Zelthar High Council was no longer able to dismiss the humans as an insignificant force. Something was happening. The fear that had been long absent from their ranks began to stir. What was this new threat? How could such a primitive species possess the ability to challenge them? The Dominion's might was unquestionable, yet these humans had made them question everything they knew. With each passing day, more of these strange human ships appeared on the scanners, each time in unexpected places, each time more audacious in their attacks. The Zelthar could no longer ignore them, but even as they prepared for a full-scale investigation into the origin of these ships, they couldn't shake the growing sense of dread that was creeping through the ranks. For the first time in a long time, the Dominion felt the stirrings of fear, a fear they hadn't known since their earliest days of expansion. Was it possible that the humans weren't as weak as they appeared? Could this small, unassuming species hold the key to toppling the Dominion? The galaxy had lived in fear of the Zelthar for so long, but now something was changing. And the question on everyone's mind was, who would truly hold the power when the dust finally settled? The vast emptiness of space was never truly silent, but the usual hum of activity within the Zelthar military was suddenly disrupted when a strange signal blipped onto their radar. It was faint at first, almost as if the unknown presence was trying to hide from their sensors. The Zelthar fleet, ever vigilant, tracked it with their advanced technology, but the signal was too strange to ignore. As the crew of the Aegis navigated the dark edge of the galaxy, Captain Alexis Rook sat calmly in her command chair, eyes sharp, focused on the display. She didn't need to see the enemy to know they were out there. The humans had long learned to navigate the void with subtlety. They were far from the brute force the Zelthar were used to encountering. Instead, the Aegis relied on stealth and tactics that had been perfected over years of bitter resistance. The ship, sleek and almost ghostly in its design, was invisible to the Dominion's radar at first, slipping through the vast emptiness unnoticed. The Zelthar military had grown accustomed to overwhelming any enemy they encountered, but they had never faced a foe quite like this. The Aegis did not announce itself with a loud confrontation. Instead, it hovered just outside their sensors, moving with such precision that the Zelthar only noticed it once it was too late. The ship was like a shadow, flickering in and out, of their tracking systems, and the Zelthar were forced to question everything they thought they knew about warfare. The first time the Aegis was detected, it wasn't because of its weapons or its speed. It was the eerie quiet that surrounded it. No guns fired, no missiles launched, no signs of hostility were present. Just the ship, a silent and haunting presence among the stars. The Dominion's fleet, massive and powerful, was suddenly thrown into chaos. Crews scrambled, unsure of what they were facing. A simple flicker of a screen, a brief glitch in their network, and suddenly there was nothing but confusion. They tried to engage with it, but every attempt seemed to slip through their grasp. The humans had mastered a new kind of warfare, one that didn't require brute force. Instead, they had become experts at manipulation, creating confusion and paranoia within the ranks of their enemies. Captain Rook, as cool-headed as ever, had engineered a precise strategy that no one could have predicted. The Aegis moved swiftly, always staying one step ahead of the Zelthar, as if it could read their movements before they even made them. It was as if the humans were ghosts in the machine, and that's what they were becoming known as, the ghost ship of the Zelthar Dominion. Rumors of its existence spread like wildfire throughout the Dominion's fleet, each new encounter more baffling than the last. Zelthar officers would report seeing the Aegis one moment, only to find it gone the next, leaving behind no trace, no wreckage, and no evidence of where it had gone. It was as if the ship had never been there at all. In the midst of this chaos, the Dominion fleet found itself growing increasingly vulnerable. They could not anticipate where the Aegis would strike next, and worse, they could not even engage it in a traditional battle. There was no fight, no epic struggle, no crushing blow, just the constant unease of never knowing when the next attack would come or where. Captain Rook's brilliance lay not in her firepower, but in her ability to unsettle her enemies. She understood that true power wasn't just about what you could destroy. It was about what you could make your enemy believe. The Dominion's once imposing fleets were now on edge, their commanders unsure of how to confront a threat that didn't fit their understanding of warfare. The might of the Zelthar, so overwhelming in its superiority, was starting to crack under the weight of its own arrogance. How could humans, a species once dismissed as insignificant, be capable of such tactics? The question hung in the air like a dark cloud, and no one had an answer. The more the Aegis moved through the stars, the more unsettling it became for the Zelthar. Each encounter left them with more questions than answers. Could this small, resourceful species truly be the ones to challenge their centuries of dominance? And as whispers of the ghost ship spread through the fleet, it became clear that the Zelthar were no longer the unchallenged rulers of the galaxy. Humanity was forcing them to rethink everything. The Zelthar Dominion had long been unchallenged, and at first, the mysterious human warship Aegis had seemed little more than a curiosity. But with each passing encounter, it became clear that the humans were not just a nuisance, they were a force to be reckoned with. Despite their limited resources and the overwhelming might of the Dominion, the humans had proven they could fight a different kind of war, one built on ingenuity, deception, and sheer determination. The Dominion's initial skepticism began to shift into unease. Captain Alexis Rook and her crew aboard the Aegis had already shown their ability to inflict damage where it seemed impossible, and now the Zelthar knew they had no choice but to respond in full force. With their pride on the line and the whispers of human victory growing, the Dominion gathered an immense fleet, a battle-hardened force that dwarfed anything the humans could muster. Their plan was simple: overwhelm the humans with their superior numbers and destroy the Aegis once and for all. They would show the galaxy that no force could stand against the might of the Zelthar. But as the Zelthar fleet entered the region where the Aegis had last been spotted, their confidence quickly turned to confusion. The Aegis was there, as expected, but it wasn't alone. From the shadows of deep space, several more ships emerged, small but unmistakably human in design. They were unlike anything the Zelthar had seen before, each vessel a unique blend of engineering and creativity that defied standard conventions. Some were sleek and fast, others more angular and rugged, yet all of them shared one thing: a strategic brilliance that unnerved the Zelthar commanders. These ships had been waiting in silence, hidden in plain sight, ready to strike at a moment's notice. They formed a tight, coordinated formation, an intricate defense network that made the Zelthar's enormous fleet seem clumsy in comparison. For the first time, the Dominion realized that the humans were not just surviving. They were planning, adapting, and making use of every advantage they could find. The Dominion had been used to enemies that fought with brute strength, but the humans fought with their minds. Each human warship had been designed with a specific purpose in mind, and they were all linked together by an unspoken understanding. The humans weren't just throwing everything they had into battle. They were using what little they had with extraordinary precision. The Zelthar, confident in their sheer numbers and technological superiority, underestimated the humans' ability to adapt. The humans didn't need to match the Zelthar in firepower. They needed only to exploit their weaknesses, and they did so with stunning efficiency. The Aegis and its new fleetmates launched a series of well-timed, devastating strikes that targeted the Zelthar's advanced systems, taking advantage of small vulnerabilities in their technology. With each strike, the Zelthar found themselves struggling to adapt. Their ships, which had once been impervious to any attack, now faltered under the humans' cunning. The Dominion's fleet, once so sure of its victory, was now forced to retreat, in disarray. The humans, with their resourceful fleet and ingenious tactics, had caused far more damage than the Zelthar could have predicted. And as the Dominion's ships limped away, damaged and confused, it was clear that the balance of power in the galaxy had begun to shift. The Aegis had not only survived the confrontation, it had turned the tables completely. The humans had proven that it wasn't just their ships that were formidable. It was their ability to outthink their enemies and adapt in the heat of battle. The Zelthar, once the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, were now faced with a challenge unlike any they had ever encountered before. And they couldn't shake the feeling that the humans had only just begun to show their true strength. As the battle between the humans and the Zelthar raged on, each encounter seemed to grow more intense, and the stakes higher. The Aegis and its fleet had become a symbol of resistance, a force that the Dominion could no longer ignore. Despite the overwhelming power of the Zelthar, the humans were proving that they could hold their own, if not with brute strength, then with intelligence, strategy, and relentless determination. It was during one of these harrowing battles that something unexpected happened. A human historian aboard the Aegis, a woman named Dr. Eleanor Carter, uncovered a long-forgotten relic in the ship's archives, an ancient manuscript, written in a language that had been considered lost for centuries. She had been studying the texts in her spare time, seeking to understand the origins of human resistance, when she came across a prophecy. It was an obscure and nearly forgotten piece of history, mentioned in only a few scattered records throughout the galaxy. But as she carefully translated the cryptic words, a chilling realization washed over her. The prophecy spoke of an ancient race known as the Untouched, a people whose destiny was to rise up and challenge the greatest empires of the galaxy. The prophecy described the Untouched as being seemingly insignificant at first, underestimated, and ignored by those in power. Yet, when the time was right, they would awaken to fulfill a greater purpose, to bring down the oppressive forces that had ruled the stars for eons. At first, Dr. Carter thought it was just a story, a myth passed down through generations. But as she pieced the fragments together, a terrifying new meaning began to emerge. The humans, the species that had been dismissed as weak and primitive, were the untouched. They were the ones foretold to challenge the galaxy's most powerful empires. The prophecy wasn't just a vague prediction. It was a clear message that humanity's destiny had already been written. They were not merely fighting for survival. They were destined to bring about the downfall of the greatest oppressors the galaxy had ever known. Dr. Carter immediately shared her discovery with Captain Rook, and the gravity of the revelation sent ripples through the Aegis's crew. The prophecy spoke of a great struggle, but it also spoke of victory, a victory that would reshape the galaxy. As the Zelthar continued their assault on the humans, the realization that the humans were part of this ancient prophecy slowly began to take root in their minds. The Dominion had long prided itself on its unchallenged might, but now a new force had emerged, one that wasn't just interested in survival, but in rewriting the very rules of the galaxy. The Zelthar High Council, once confident in their supremacy, began to sense a growing unease. The humans were not simply a thorn in their side. They were the heralds of something much larger, something that had been foreseen long before their empire had risen to power. And as whispers of the prophecy spread, the Zelthar found themselves facing an unsettling truth. The more they fought, the more it seemed like they were playing into the hands of fate. Their overconfidence, which had served them so well for centuries, began to unravel. Could it be that the humans, those untouched ones, had always been destined to challenge them? The Zelthar knew they could not allow such a truth to take hold, but with each passing day, it became harder to deny. The Dominion, once the greatest power in the galaxy, now had a new enemy to fear, one that was not just fighting to survive, but to fulfill an ancient prophecy. And the galaxy was watching, waiting to see whether the Zelthar could stop the unstoppable force they had unwittingly unleashed. As the war against the Zelthar Dominion intensified, the Aegis and its crew found themselves uncovering more than just military tactics. They were uncovering the very secrets of the galaxy's past. What had started as a desperate struggle for survival was now evolving into something far larger. The crew, led by Captain Rook, had been exploring ancient ruins on a forgotten planet, one of the few places untouched by the Dominion's long reach. It was there, hidden beneath layers of dust and time, that they discovered the first clue. An ancient library of texts, written by a race long gone. The texts spoke of an age before the rise of the Dominion, when the galaxy was not ruled by a single empire, but was home to a powerful alliance of species. These species had once banded together to stop the Zelthar during their earliest attempts at conquest. For centuries, the Dominion had painted itself as the undisputed ruler of the stars, with no one ever questioning its dominance. But these newly discovered texts told a different story, one where the Zelthar were not the unstoppable force they had become. Long ago they had been beaten back, forced to retreat, and their empire had almost crumbled. It was the combined strength of this alliance that had driven the Zelthar into the shadows, forcing them to regroup and rebuild over millennia. As Captain Rook and the Aegis crew deciphered more of the texts, a shocking realization took shape. Humanity wasn't just some small, insignificant species in the eyes of the Dominion. No, the humans were far more than that. It became clear that humanity's sudden appearance in the war, seemingly out of nowhere, was not a coincidence. In fact, humanity had been a part of that ancient alliance that had once stopped the Zelthar. The connection was undeniable. The humans, in their own distant past, had fought alongside these other species to halt the Dominion's rise. Over the years, however, the humans had been forgotten, their legacy erased, their role in galactic history obscured. But now, humanity's return to the galaxy wasn't just a fluke. It was part of a much larger plan. The Dominion had never seen it coming. In a strange twist of fate, the humans had unknowingly inherited the key to the Dominion's downfall. The very resourcefulness and adaptability the Zelthar had so long underestimated were the same qualities that had made humans integral to the Alliance centuries ago. Humanity, once thought to be nothing more than a fragile, primitive species, was now positioned to finish what their ancestors had started. The Aegis crew understood the magnitude of this revelation. They were not merely fighting for survival, they were fighting for the galaxy's future, and they were not alone. The pieces were falling into place, and it was becoming clear that the humans had a unique role to play in the ultimate defeat of the Dominion. But this knowledge also brought new pressure. The Zelthar would not go down easily. They would fight with everything they had. And now that they knew the truth of humanity's connection to the ancient alliance, they would be even more determined to crush the humans before their plan could succeed. With this knowledge in hand, Captain Rook and her crew prepared for a final strike. They knew the stakes had never been higher. The Aegis would lead the charge, but it would not be a fight that could be won with tactics alone. The humans had to harness the legacy of their ancestors, uniting all their ingenuity, resourcefulness, and courage to face the Dominion head-on. This was not just another battle. It was the chance to rewrite history, to finally undo the centuries of tyranny that had plagued the galaxy. The crew of the Aegis stood ready, their resolve unshakable. The Zelthar may have been the dominant power for millennia, but the humans were about to prove that even the mightiest empire could be toppled by the power of an idea, a forgotten legacy, and the will of those who refused to bow to oppression. The final confrontation was coming, and the fate of the galaxy would be decided by the strength of human resolve. The Zelthar Dominion, once a towering empire of unchallenged power, found itself on the edge of panic. Despite their overwhelming strength, the humans had turned the tide, forcing the Dominion to face the unthinkable, the real possibility of defeat. For centuries, the Zelthar had crushed entire civilizations without hesitation, but now they were up against something they couldn't comprehend: humanity. The Dominion, desperate to eliminate this new threat once and for all, launched a massive offensive, sending wave after wave of their fleet to crush the Aegis and its allies. They were determined to put an end to the human resistance, to extinguish the fire of defiance that had grown stronger with every battle. But Captain Alexis Rook and her crew were not about to back down. With every skirmish, they had learned more about the Dominion, and now they had uncovered a crucial weakness in the heart of the Zelthar war machine, their central command hub. This was the nerve center of their entire empire, where decisions were made and fleets were coordinated. If the humans could infiltrate and disable this fortress, the Dominion's vast military might would crumble, leaving them vulnerable. The mission was perilous, an all-or-nothing strike deep within enemy territory. But Captain Rook knew that it was their only chance to end the war and ensure humanity's future. Without hesitation, she gathered her most trusted officers and, together, they prepared for the final assault. As the Aegis and its allied ships drew closer to the Dominion's command hub, they faced unimaginable odds. The Zelthar fleet, now aware of the humans' bold plan, moved to intercept them. The skies were filled with explosions, and the vacuum of space echoed with the sound of battle as the humans fought to make their way toward the heart of the Dominion's empire. Yet, With every clash, the humans held their ground, proving that their strength lay not in numbers or firepower, but in their adaptability, unity, and unwavering resolve. On the ground, Captain Rook and her team faced their own brutal struggle. The command hub was heavily fortified, and as they infiltrated deeper, they encountered fierce resistance from the Dominion's elite soldiers. But the humans fought with a purpose, driven by the knowledge that they were on the verge of changing the galaxy forever. Each soldier, each officer aboard the Aegis, knew that their actions would determine the fate of billions. The Zelthar had never seen anything like it. For the first time, they were up against a force that refused to be intimidated, a species that adapted quickly, that worked together in ways the Dominion could never have imagined. The battle raged, but slowly, steadily, the humans pushed forward, exploiting every weakness, outsmarting their enemies at every turn. It wasn't just the technology that gave the humans an edge. It was their courage, their ability to think outside the box, and their fierce determination to protect their world and their people. In the chaos of the final assault, Captain Rook and her team reached the heart of the command hub. They had one chance, one window of opportunity to disable the central systems that powered the Dominion's war efforts. With the Aegis providing cover, they set to work, sabotaging the key infrastructure that had kept the Zelthar on top for so long. As the countdown to their mission's success ticked away, the Zelthar could feel the shift. They knew that they were losing control. For the first time in centuries, the empire that had ruled with an iron fist was beginning to crumble. The humans were not just surviving, they were winning. In the final moments, as the central command hub fell into chaos and the Dominion's fleet faltered, the humans proved something that the galaxy had long forgotten. The true strength of humanity was not in the power of their weapons, but in the power of their spirit. As the Aegis and its allies made their final stand, they sent a message to the galaxy. No empire, no matter how powerful, could stand forever, and the spirit of those who fight for freedom would always burn brighter than any force of tyranny. The final strike against the Zelthar Dominion had been a resounding success. The heart of their empire, once an unshakable fortress, lay in ruins, and the vast fleets that had once dominated the galaxy were now shattered. The Zelthar, with their once glorious military might broken, had no choice but to retreat. Their reign of terror, which had spanned countless star systems and crushed civilizations under its iron grip, had come to a sudden and humiliating end. The galaxy, long oppressed by the Dominion, stood on the cusp of a new era, an era of hope. Yet, for the humans, this victory was not the end, but the beginning of something far greater. No longer would humanity be seen as a weak, insignificant species struggling for survival. Instead, they had proven themselves capable of taking on the galaxy's most powerful and terrifying species. They had shown that even the most ruthless empire could fall, and it was the humans who had led the charge. As the dust settled and the stars shone brighter than ever before, humanity began to take its place at the forefront of the galaxy's future. Other civilizations, once fearful of the humans' rise, now looked to them not with distrust, but with hope. The Aegis and its crew, once a symbol of defiance and resistance, became a beacon of peace and strength. Captain Rook, standing on the bridge of the Aegis as they sailed through the stars, knew the galaxy had changed forever. The humans had not risen to power through violence and domination like the Zelthar, but through wisdom, determination, and the unshakable belief in freedom. The other species of the galaxy, who had long lived in the shadow of the Dominion, now sought alliances with humanity, eager to learn from their example. What was once considered a small, fragmented race was now the foundation of a new order, a force for peace, not destruction. The humans, having proven their courage in battle, were now seen as the protectors of the galaxy, not just because of their power, but because of the righteousness of their cause. Their warships, once feared for their immense firepower, were now revered as symbols of justice, hope, and resilience. The galaxy that had once cowered before the Zelthar now looked to humanity for guidance. It was a new dawn for all, one where alliances were forged not through fear, but through shared ideals. And as the Aegis and its crew sailed on, knowing their victory had turned the tide, they also understood the responsibility that came with it. The battle against the Dominion was over, but the true work had just begun. Now it was their task to rebuild the galaxy, to ensure that the lessons learned from the war would not be forgotten. Humanity's legacy, once thought of as a fleeting hope, had become a guiding light for the future. The Aegis sailed toward the stars with a new mission: to protect the peace they had fought so hard to achieve, and to teach the galaxy that strength lies not in conquering, but in uniting. The war was over, but the era of humanity's leadership was just beginning, and the galaxy now stood in awe of what had once seemed impossible. The rise of a species that had once been underestimating, but was now the galaxy's most powerful force for good.